Okay. Hello, online people. We've turned the audio up a little bit. Hopefully that'll be better.
Okay, see if I can read this the right way. Would you say that duration is another myth that just keeps us entrenched, the idea of duration?
Sure. Any idea. I mean, anything. I mean, I put it in sort of general terms. Anything that seems to be anything, and I mean that very generally and across the board. So duration. If duration seems like duration, then it's not real, and which is an invitation to find out what is real. And there's something duration is based on. There's an actuality that the notion of duration is based on, but that actuality completely transcends the notion, which will always be the case with any notion, no matter how sophisticated. And that's always the trick, is to go to see what the experiential basis for the notion is, and notice that, and you will notice that what that experiential actuality is transcends the notion, no matter how sophisticated the notion. And duration is certainly anything. I mean, basically anything you can indicate by a word or an idea is just the very coarsest level of what is not true.
So it would be good to drop back or fall back into the origin or something.
Yeah, always go to experience. Experience is the basis for everything. When you were born, you didn't have anything but experience. You didn't know what anything was, and every single idea you've accumulated since then is based on and reference to that fact of experience. Now, that fact of experience hasn't gone anywhere. Your experience now is basically the same as it was when you were newborn. It's still just experience. But you've accumulated a huge repertoire of classifications and qualifications, which you've been educated and indoctrinated to suppose accurately refers to that experience. And it does refer to that experience in the sense that it's based on it, and it does refer to it approximately and accurately. But the challenge is to take any idea and find what it's based on, and you'll discover the way in which the idea is untrue, but more importantly, you'll discover what is true, which is the actual nature of this as it is.
Sorry.
So you can take things, space, time. I mean, no holds are barred. Anything that seems to be anything whatsoever is based on something.
So the original something.
Yeah, the experience. And go to experience and see what that is. And you'll find the actuality. You'll find the prototype of what the model is. Because, time as an actuality is what is happening here. It's not an idea. Space as an actuality is what's happening here. It's not an idea. And you can have all sorts of sophisticated ideas about space and equations and write papers about it and all this stuff. But if they mean anything at all, it refers to this actuality. And the actuality will always transcend and be more and other than any description, no matter how elaborate, sophisticated, and intelligent. And that certainly applies to notions like duration or anything, for that matter. And so that's the trick, is to notice actuality, and all of a sudden you have access to all of this expanded properties rather than the little sort of dumbed down, dull stick figure versions of them that our ideas are capable of embodying. It's like moving from black and white to Technicolor, or from 2D to 3D or something, you know, because experience is so rich, it's so pregnant with actualities, but most of those actualities are very nonlinear and slippery and don't lend themselves to being captured in ideas. So ideas are very paltry by comparison with this richness. And by identifying so strongly with the ideas, we cut ourselves off from the richness, from the nourishing of the richness, and also from the possibilities inherent in the richness, because the richness gives us a lot of non-linear ways to be with things and to do things and to approach things that are illogical. So from within a conceptual framework, they don't even occur to us because they're not accessible there. In other words, in terms of words, you're kind of encouraged to color inside the lines. In terms of reality, there are no lines. No lines. You know, it's the words and ideas that supply the lines. And then you can be inside the line or outside the line. Inside the line and outside the line is meaningless in terms of reality because there's no lines. So there's no inside and outside. It's just...
So even when I'm stuck in words, in reality I'm not.
Exactly. You never... You know, this is another important principle in practice. You never need to be in another condition that you are. You're never actually stuck in anything, even if you feel like you are. So you never need to change anything. All you need to do is see what the actual condition is. So if you're stuck in some condition, you don't need to get unstuck from that condition. You just need to see what it is, and then you will discover that, in fact, you are unstuck. Because you never were stuck, because it's impossible to be stuck. There's nothing to be stuck in. So you don't need to change anything, like we were talking about earlier with the reactivity and anger and stuff like that. You don't need to change the apparent condition. You just need to see what it is, and then you'll discover that it's not what you're used to holding it to be, and so you don't actually need to free yourself of it because you weren't actually trapped in it. Yeah, which is, I mean, which is really, in practical terms, is very, very useful.
Yeah, it sounds like grace.
Yeah, because we're so used to, I have to improve myself. I have to fix my problems. I have to, I have all these faults, and I have to, I have to work on this. I have to work on that. God, I keep doing this. I keep doing that. Why do I, And it's like none of that actually matters. I mean, you're free. There's nothing wrong whatsoever with self-improvement. If you're into that, have at it. But there's no absolutely zero spiritual advantage to it. The spiritual advantage, liberation, comes from seeing what this is, not from changing it from one condition into another condition. And then once you're liberated, then if you want to improve yourself, have at it. Or for that matter, before you're liberated, if you want to improve yourself, have at it. But don't make the mistake of thinking you're going to be getting anything in terms of liberation. Genuine spirituality is concerned with one thing. It's concerned with liberation. It's not concerned with self-improvement. And liberation, it turns out, is based on simply discovering what was already the case. So since it's already the case, you obviously don't need to change anything to avail yourself of it. You just need to notice it and appreciate it. Or noticing it enables you to appreciate it and engage in it fully. And because of the nature of what this happens to be, fortunately, it has all these wonderful side effects of noticing it, one of which is liberation. And liberation is liberation from any kind of entrapment, any basis for suffering, any basis for limitation whatsoever, any basis for separation, because none of those conditions actually exist, as it happens. It's very fortunate that happens to be the case, but it does happen to be the case. And so we can take advantage of it simply by noticing it, without needing to do anything or change anything or achieve anything. Just simply see what's the case.
It warrants a hallelujah.
Yeah, absolutely. Amen, brother.
I'd like to ask you about direct experience when it comes to paradoxes, which is just about everything. But in particular, one in mind right now is like I pay attention to my experience right now.
Mm-hmm.
And everything shows up in clarity.
Mm-hmm.
Clarity does not change one iota.
Right.
Never has.
Sure.
But everything that shows up in it is morphing. I mean,
Right.
Everything.
Yeah.
And there's not a problem there. It's just that it can't be separated out. I mean, it can't separate out the
Yeah.
clarity from the morphing.
Right.
And so when I look there, it just gets hazy rather than me seeing any kind of truth. I mean, obviously they're both existing as one thing.
Well, that's it. You put your nail, you put your head on, you put your finger on it, which is, if it seems to be clarity and it seems to be morphing, then it seems to be something. If it seems to be something, it's a misinterpretation. So is clarity really clarity? Is morphing really morphing? I mean, that's why I collapse all of that down to this one word, presence. Because
But presence still static. I mean, maybe it's my interpretation. Presence still not static, but I guess that's my association. So,
but it may, the idea may feel static, but is it static? Can you find anything that's here that's static? I mean, you say that the clarity never changes, but can you find anything unchanging? You can't find it. So what it is not that simple. It's not simply that the case that there is a clarity and it never changes. I mean, that may be a notion that has some value to it, but it's not a true notion. And so as such, it's another subtle holding.
I guess just this whole idea that there is not an idea that there's something indestructible that's not affected by the morphing, good and bad. Well,
there may or may not be, but find the actuality without expecting it to conform to the conditions that you're expecting. And when you find the actuality of what doesn't change, you will simultaneously find the actuality of what does change, because they're one and the same. In other words, there aren't two things. There's not a clarity and there's not a morphing. It's just this. Is it clear? Sure. Is it morph? Sure.
If this is energizing, I mean, for me, whereas I'm at home doing the dishes, or I have a physical situation and I have not been able to get out and exercise for a month or more, and it becomes very mundane, that actuality, and boring.
Mm-hmm.
So.
But again, it's not really mundane and boring. You're just holding it. You're holding it that way.
Yeah.
And you're not. There's no one with a gun to your head insisting that you hold it that way. So if you have the wit or the wherewithal or the luck to stumble onto challenging that, or looking under the carpet, or just looking around the corners, or just sort of letting it be a little bit more than that, you can and will discover that it is more.
Well, acceptance generally has helped me.
Sure, that's a good one. Sure, I mean there's a bazillion.
Of a situation.
Yeah, there's a bazillion tricks.
Yeah.
All of which fundamentally have to do with sort of how you're positioning yourself in the energy of the event, of the experience field. But you're never actually stuck. There's never actually boredom or dullness. I mean, you can just do something as very simple as noticing, is what I'm experiencing now, have I ever experienced it before? Any of it? And the answer is always going to be a resounding no.
Really?
Of course.
Feels like yes to me.
No, because let's take that sweater or jacket you're wearing. So you've probably worn that jacket many times, and you may look at it and say, "Oh, I'm just seeing this jacket again. I saw it yesterday. I'll be seeing it tomorrow." But you see, the idea of a same jacket is there, but you've never seen it with exactly the wrinkles you're seeing. You've never seen it in exactly the light that's hitting it now. You've never noticed exactly the point. Your arm hasn't been exactly to the nanometer and where it is in relation to your eyes. Well, whatever. I mean, I'm just using this as an example. But sameness is supplied in imagination. Experience never repeats to the tiniest degree. I mean, this is an example, and since that's the fact, you can notice it as the fact. And in that you discover a very powerful mode of unstuckness. because you're always going into newness. You're always going into complete newness, complete spontaneity. And in that context, it's pretty, if you can feel that, feel the truth of that, it's pretty hard to feel stuck. Oh. I mean, always, you know, the master formula is always simply go to the actuality of your experience and notice ways in which it is other than what you're used to thinking it is. Any way that hits you, that strikes your fancy, that pops into your mind. You know, it's spontaneity, it's newness, it's non-repetitive nature, it's undefinability. I mean, look at something and just say, what shape is this? Well, it's the shape that it is. What shape is it? It's too complex. It's too complex. You can't say what shape it is. And so right away you're in the presence of infinity. You're in the presence of indefinability. And what's that feel like? What's that feel like compared to just sort of the dull thinking of, oh, I know, it's just the shape that it is, and it's boring. You know, it's like, no, it's like it's an inconceivable shape that you can't wrap your head around. It's like asking, what shape is a cloud? Oh, it's that shape. You know. But then you look more closely, what shape is it? It's like, well, it has a shape, kind of, but it's not a shape that has edges. It's not a shape that can be found. It's an infinity. It is shape, but it's infinity at the same time. Yeah, and everything is actually like that, and that's, I mean, this is a self-evident fact. So we think we live in this world of sort of sensory objects that are more or less sharply defined with sharp edges that are just sort of sitting there inertly being boring, where in actuality they're all these fuzzy-edged infinities like clouds, you know, and they're all question marks, not just in terms of a quality like shape, but in terms of all qualities. You can't pin down, you can't get to the bottom of any quality that is actually experiencely present in the actuality of experiencing anything. And so simply seeing that, all of a sudden you notice your experience as this vast, open, subtle, you know, subtle novelty rather than this dull, boring, pedestrian normalcy. Or you can notice the aliveness of things. Everything moves. Experientially, everything moves. I mean, you can take, I mean, you've heard me probably many times give the example. You sit for 5 minutes and look at a blank wall without moving and watch what you actually see. And, you know, you'll be calling the, you know, you'll be calling 911 to take you away to the mental institution if you expect the wall to be a solid, stable thing, because you aren't going to find a solid, stable wall experientially. But, oh, the wall's just sitting there, stable, it's not moving. Okay, sit and look at it. Be with the actual experience of the wall, and you will be being with motion. Pure and simple. It's completely obvious. It's not even subtle. It's blatantly obvious. And then look at any other shape. Something on walls is particularly obvious because, you know, they're so blank and we're so used to thinking of them as inert. But look at anything else. You know, look at your pants leg, and it's like, just sit really still and watch your pants. And the concept is, well, I'm not moving, so they're not moving. But the reality of your visual experience is just this light. It's like you took acid or something. The light shows everything's just waving and wheeling, and that's the reality of experience. And your genes exist in reality as an experience. So your genes are vibrating. You know, that's not you know, hyperbole, or that's not you know, just sort of sophistry. It's a self-evident experiential fact. You can't find, stable genes are imaginary. The reality of genes is this vibrating light show. Stable walls is imaginary. The reality of walls is this vibrating light show.
And that applies to everything.
Find out for yourself. Look and see. And if you do look and see, and if you find out for yourself that it does apply, then you can access that at any time you want. So anytime you're sitting at home and feeling dull and doing the dishes and, you know, thinking, woe is me or something, just like look at anything and notice, wow, this dullness is made of an astounding, non-repeating, completely unique, spontaneous vibrational field vibrational infinite dimensional field, and it's kind of hard to manufacture dullness and normalcy in a context like that. And that's your actual that's your actual experiential context. We can see. Our experience is not what we think it is. And we're used to thinking it is what we think it is, of course. And what we think it is little and dull and boring and lifeless. And what it actually is vast and infinite and multidimensional and alive and spontaneous and vibrating and just pregnant with meaningfulness and multidimensional qualities and implications.
You said what we think we are is being lucidly dreamed by what we actually are.
I don't know if I'd call it lucid, but yeah.
Yeah, I qualify as lucid.
Sure.
I mean, there's that statement, we are such stuff as dreams are made of, Shakespeare. And
sure.
When I dream, I'm assuming that the characters in my dream don't have, autonomy and sentience of themselves. And in my case, as I identify myself, I have a certain reflected sentience. A dog is sentient, but it doesn't have the kind of self-reflection and self-consciousness in my head.
But you can't get a handle on anything, really. I mean, what is sentience? Well, you can say, well, the sentience present. Okay, the sentience present, is it in me? Is it mine? Is it, anything whatsoever that is arguably actual, and when you look at it, you will discover that it is other than how you're holding it to be. And that certainly applies to any notion of self, any notion of functionality, any notion of consciousness, any notion of embodiment, any notion of, volition, any notion of, all these notions they're just too simplistic to accurately apply to the actuality, which is just open dimensional. And there's your emptiness again.
Another question I have is this term spanda, I think, Kashmir Shaivism. I imagine sort of energetic oscillating current that one can be aware of, but I'm not a student of Kashmir Shaivism, but I'm just sort of curious about that. If there's something you can say about that, what is it? What's the value of it? What does it confer?
Spanda in Kashmir Shaivism is one of the absolutely pivotal notions of that tradition. It refers to the inherent liveliness of reality. We were talking about that just now when we talked about how experience pulsates and vibrates and is alive. Empirically, it just is. And Spanda is exactly that principle. That everything and anything whatsoever that actually exists is dynamic, is alive, is energetic, is vital, is radiant. All these sort of various notions you can put on it, but the point is to go to the reality itself, and you discover the aliveness and the vitality and the absolute animation of actuality, of reality itself, that it inherently is. So it shines forth from itself, as itself, within itself. And this shining forth is Spanda. And in Kashmir Shaivism, in terms of practice, that's considered one of the most powerful practices, is simply noticing this vitality, noticing this radiance. And it takes you to the very core of things immediately, because it is absolutely primal. In other words, it's not an ephemeral or a superficial characteristics of things, but their very nature.
Again, tradition I don't know anything about, but Shekinah or something, isn't that Shekinah? How do you say it?
Yes, Shekinah, yeah.
The Kabbalistic or Jewish, would that be a parallel?
Yeah, similar thing. Shekinah is roughly equivalent to Shakti. Shekinah is in the Middle Eastern tradition. Etymologically they're obviously even related. So Shakti, it refers to the vital, vibrant, energetic embodiment of or apparition of reality. I'm sorry, just a sec. But the important thing, again, is to go to the actuality of these notions rather than
Sure.
be with the abstraction within the traditions. Because the actuality, of course, is right here, right now, always, and doesn't depend upon the tradition of philosophy. And the actuality is powerful and empowering and liberating.
This month has been quite a bit. It's hard for me to say much. You know, even though when you are not here, I'm thinking about it. I have a lot of things to ask you. But when I'm sitting here, when you are talking, and I just feel sizzling, you know, the whole body was sizzling. And I find that everything I want to say becomes so pale. But I still feel like if I don't ask when you are here, I have to wait for 1 more month.
Oh, 2 more weeks now.
Or 2 more weeks. I can't wait for that. Okay. But anyway, it takes a lot of maturity, I guess, to hear what you say.
Yes, it does.
Even when I'm looking back, I saw you say from the real beginning, very beginning, about this is not what we think it is. So I find this month, and I heard it. And a couple of days ago, I heard a sutra that's called the Lankavatara, and it's translated by Red Pine. Well, this sutra, I didn't know it before, but I know in Chinese term, a few years ago, a awakened guy suggested me to read this sutra. But since he's speaking English, so I don't understand what he was talking about. But people translate to different things. When I get it, it's not what he was talking about. So I never got a chance to read this sutra. And then I still haven't read it yet. I don't know if I'm going to or not. But in the translation, Red Pine said there's 2 things was teaching in this sutra. It's very important. 2 things. The first thing is that everything we think we see, we think we saw are real. It is not. And then the second point is one has to be really experienced to know it. Has to experience to know it, not by the word whatsoever. I really heard it. I felt so resonated with it. And it's just the way you were teaching. Nothing is what it seems to be as we thought to be. It is not. So that came down to the seeing, the noticing. There are so many seeing, the here and there about the light stuff, the see the light. And I don't know whether, which way that I should keep paying more attention to. One is seeing with open my eye. Another one is seeing with closed eye closed. There are early scenes like the green wall. It is just so vibrant and so moving. It's incredible. I revisit this morning because I don't really go back to look at that often. I went there this morning. Just so mind-boggling.
Yeah.
And I said one time I was looking at the wall, and the wall is not wall, it's the light. It's so mind-boggling. And lately I was, trying to do so-called practice or whatever, just pay more attention to, direct attention to one single area, flat area. Then I sometimes I can literally see this very fine line of the white color, and it is moving, and it can come from any direction. But sometimes it is more like smoke, you know, the smoke
Mm-hmm.
white is more wider and more fuzzy, or sometimes can be just a completely white color in whatever the background, maybe darker ground.
Right.
And sometimes it's the really white light, like a needle point, really white. Or it can be slightly larger, like a pea, you know, the white color in the rather darker ground. It never come in the center, it's always on the side, maybe things like that, randomly. It's come and go. So, but also, maybe this has to be related to the with closed my eyes looking. This is very fascinating. When I look at the candle light, sometimes it's split to two, and then the one striking up to the middle. And I thought, what's wrong with my eye? I may, maybe looking too long. So I tried to close my one eye. I think maybe the two eyes that is bleeding. So I closed my one eye. All of a sudden, it's so amazing. See this. It's not a light. This light in this area. It's all the surrounding. And it's all like this.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, this eye is useless. I get another eye, and it's the same thing.
Yeah.
So it's I can't say even it's light.
Yeah.
But it's all like vibrant, things like that.
Yeah.
So this is about open my eye seeing.
Right.
And with closed my eyes seeing, sometimes it's bright color. Mainly there are 4 different colors. The majority color is pinkish, something like that. I don't know the word, but very, very beautiful. So bright, that color. And then sometimes it can have a green comes in too. It's so bright green, and or sometimes white, and sometimes beautiful blue color, and they can be dominating the entire view, or they can be like points, immersing, things like that. And by looking at that, I feel like it's not seen by my physical eye, but I can't say what it is.
Yeah.
But when I was open my eyes looking, sometimes this comes over too. This kind of thing comes over. So the pinkish color would come to whatever I was looking, and that color would show up, or the green color can show up too. So I know I'm intentionally looking. Because somehow, just lately, all of a sudden I realized what we were seeing were real. It may not be real at all. So why am I trying to believe the things what I'm to just go to the experience, see what is real? But I know this is going to take a long time. It takes a lot, or it takes whatever, or so-called practice or whatever, to see the real thing, what is real going on. So I don't know if I'm caught up in my attention, or I should just more just letting it go, or I don't know.
The thing about looking and different ways of looking is every time you look, it will be a new way. Whatever you think it is, you may think, it's the same way. Every time you look, it's actually going to be new, and what you see every time is going to be new. Because it's not like you're trying to see something that is a certain way, and the more you look, you're going to see the way it is. You're seeing something that is anyway. It can appear as anything. And so you're discovering its freedom, you're discovering its openness. It's not, in other words, it's not a matter of, like a scientist, maybe you look closer and closer and closer and get closer and closer to what it is. It's more like discovering the openness of the different ways it can be. And they're all real, each one is real, each one is true. And no one is more real or true than any other one. And so that's what you actually finally discover, is that this can look like anything, absolutely anything, and it can it can look like, and the looking at it can look like anything too. You know, there's an infinite range of ways of looking, just like there's infinite range of what can be seen. And so the point is to discover that openness, to discover that vastness, rather than to hone in on something particular or objective or that it's a certain way and you're going to go to it. And open and closed doesn't matter at all. That it's because you're not looking for something, you're looking at what experience itself is. And the very nature of experience is that it's unbounded. It's not one thing or another. It's always itself, but it will always look different in every way.
Yeah, on that article, it's talking about the leap over. So it's to see more towards the reality, what it really is.
Yeah, to see what you penetrate, but you're leaping over objectivity. You're leaping over the notion that there is anything. You're leaping into seeing just seeing itself, not seeing something, but just seeing. And you discover that seeing is radiance, seeing is presence. So, and you move to that directly without a mediation. In other words, there's no medium of eyes or medium of a world or medium of consciousness. It's just absolutely naked, just presence.
But why is that practice? Whereas in that article, it's specifically talk about the practice and what you're seeing from one step to the other. And
well, that's
what's the point? What's the point of saying that?
Well, it's a way of making it practical to people so they can find it. But when you find the reality of it, then you transcend the need for all of the specifics. So
is that more practical to see what is the more easiest? Let's see that wall. I'm standing there. It's just mind-boggling. Everything. So is that place that I should maybe I can.
Well, the point is to be with it over a period of time. So you are with it more subtly. You're with it more. You come to what it actually is more and more precisely, more and more subtly as you become experienced with it. Because at first when you see it, it's like, wow, it's big shock, kind of surprise. But then when you get more used to it, then you get to be with it more and more subtly and sort of settle into it. You can't really be talked about. But you just, it's coming to what this is, what you are. And what that is revealed in seeing. Because what you are is basically a seeing. Right? That's what all this is.
And one time I was walking in a place and all of a sudden I saw the reflection on the floor and everything. It just, my whole energy is just to go to whack. Completely disoriented and the energy shooting everywhere.
But that's good. The important point is to become more and more sensitive to the energy, rather than to be with it a particular way, this way or that way, or to do this or that. And you become more sensitive just by being with it, by being aware of it over time. Just like immersion. Immersion. It was like that. Like you learn to swim by being in water a lot. And at first you get in water and you can swim a little bit, maybe if someone teaches you. But after you've been in water for thousands and thousands of hours over your life, you don't even think twice. You have a familiarity with it. You've mastered it, kind of. And this is the same way to be with that direct energy. For a long enough time that you really are very intimately familiar with what it actually is, which is what you are, of course, because that's all there is this radiance.
I've been listening to people's comments and questions and like that, and I've noticed an undercurrent of, if I were to put it in words, it's kind of like
seeing what this is dependent on a lot of things. It's dependent on not getting angry. It's dependent on noticing what's going on. It's dependent maybe on your behavior, on not having thoughts, on living cleanly. There's a lot of, it's dependent on, and I question that.
Absolutely. Oh, I agree completely. We were just talking about that. You know, this is not about self-improvement or that you need to be in a certain state or condition that will be superior to some other state or condition, because the point is to discover what this is and has always been and always will be, which of course is always the case, so it's always discoverable, it's always available. And it can know itself because it does know itself. And the way in which it can seem to not know itself and the way in which it can seem to come to know itself is ultimately inscrutable and nonlinear and mind-boggling. So it's best not to try to deconstruct that too heavy-handed.
I wanted to respond to the word spanda.
Mm-hmm.
When I heard that word, it's just my makeup.
Uh-huh.
That would be something that so would take me away from what the present or what is or looking at anything and put me into, that's exotic, I have to learn that.
Sure.
And then that's something I would add to myself and add to the confusion.
Mm-hmm. Sure. That's very typical. I mean, that happens with a lot of people. That's the problem with all of these formalized spiritual teachings, you know, because you can just spend a lifetime learning all these philosophies and traditions and terminologies and foreign languages and rituals and all of this stuff, you know, which again is, even if there is valuable information encoded or embodied in these traditions, what it's really about is your immediate experience right here, right now.
Yes.
So, of course, the shortest route, the most efficient way to discover that is to be with your experience here now rather than do the long circumlocution through becoming an expert in some obscure Indian tradition. You know, it's like going to India to discover what's here. When you're here now, why not just do it here now?
Right.
You know, I was reading I forget Kalam's name. Anyway, he was saying that I was talking about thoughts and emotion, that when you just see them directly, that it's like mist. They evaporate. Mm-hmm. And he said, you don't have to do this like on everything. It's just that it's not like you do this and you have to do this other one. It's just like looking at my jeans and there's like subtle vibration. It's not that, okay, well I thaw that out, I have to thaw her jacket. Now I need to thaw that. Mm-hmm. Is that it's some that it actually starts globalizing.
Yeah.
As one that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the point is to see what this is, and it's not like you need to keep seeing what this is. Keep checking yourself every instant forever, because it is what it is. It will continue to be, more or less.
So the interpretations begin to kind of just evaporate. They seem like they start to thaw.
Well, when you see conclusively that the interpretations are inaccurate, then you don't go back to them. You know, it's like, oh, okay, I get it. The interpretations cannot capture this, and then that is the case. Yeah. And it doesn't mean that thoughts stop or interpreting stops, because that's what the mind does, but it becomes a non-issue because it's not a category that you take to be anything to take seriously. It's just like this crazy lady yelling in the corner of the room. You know, it's like, oh, I happen to have a psychotic living in my head that keeps yelling at me. You know, inanity. You know, most of which are about what's going on and what I am and what I should do and all these other things, but none of it has any accuracy or bearing on anything. So once you get that conclusively, it's like, oh, okay, I get it. But it's not like you need to keep rediscovering it. And the point is to see. This sort of globally addresses the whole notion of spiritual practice. Spiritual practice is a tool, and the tool is to discover something. And what is to be discovered is what this is, what you are. And the point of the tool is to effect that discovery. The tool is unimportant in itself. So any kind of inquiry, investigation, meditation, sensory exploration, all these kinds of things, the point of them is not the thing in itself. The point is not to become an expert at exploration. The point is to use the exploration to discover what is to be found, find it, and then forget it. The point of a key is to open the lock, and once the lock's open, you don't need to worry about it. You don't need to become an expert on your key and carry around your key going, oh, my key, my key, my key. So the point of all this seeing, seeing these lights and all this stuff, it's not like, oh, this is great, now I'm going to go home and stare at the wall, and tomorrow I'm going to get up and stare at the wall, and the next day. Yeah, you can do that, but once you get it, once you see what it is, you know what it is. If you truly see it, and you don't need to keep reproving it or reaffirming it. Because the technique is not important in itself. The technique is a means to an end, and the end is discovering what this is, what you are. And once you discover that, then you know it.
It just seems like a kind of, for instance, I've been noticing more things about movement, like when I'm walking the dog, relative things, just movement in general, just like, there's trees, and there's a road, and there's the mountains, and there's the telephone lines and the houses. But the relative movement, everything is just like, it's doing this kind of thing, and I'm becoming more, I just feel like I'm becoming more sensitive as opposed to, so there is a deepening. And this kind of movement thing didn't occur to me before that much. It's more like, well, instead of me walking here, it's just like, well, there's this stuff just morphing in front of my, I'm here, I'm just here. And this stuff is just morphing, going by.
Right. Yeah. Well, your sensitivity increases and will continue to increase indefinitely. But that's just a constant. That's always the case. There's it's kind of twofold, This is very heavy-handed and inaccurate, but you can think of it kind of like a two-stage rocket. You know how then when they send a satellite to the moon or something, there might be a booster rocket that gets it up out of the atmosphere, and then that falls away, and another rocket kicks in to take it the rest of the way, sort of thing, or something. There's actually two phases of spirituality, and the first phase is like a booster rocket. And it consists of discovering what this is. And all sorts of very heavy-handed practices are used for this. Meditations and inquiries and all these sorts of things can be used to address that phase of the work. And then at a certain point realization occurs, where you get what this is. And once you get what this is, that booster stage falls away, becomes no longer relevant. You don't need to keep investigating what this is because you know what this is. But at that point, the second stage of the process takes over, which is the nature of what this is infinite unfoldment, infinite development, infinite and unending development of subtlety, infinite and unending exploration of itself. And that phase kicks in and becomes relevant. So in a very profound sense, the spiritual process is unending. But in the initial phase, you're going for realization, and on a practical scale of where most people are at, they would consider that the end of the game. And it's not to diminish that. That's absolutely profound. But it's not actually the end of anything. Because, of course, when in realization you discover what this condition is, which doesn't stop this condition from being what it is and continuing to be the way that it is unendingly and eternally. And you then participate in it directly rather than participating in it as a challenge to discover what it is. So realization continues to deepen and unfold unendingly, eternally, forever. Because that's the nature of what this is that this is exploring itself and coming to be with itself more and more profoundly forever. And of course, you are that. What this is what you are, and so that's what you are doing, and will always do forever, beyond space and time. But the early stage of spirituality is discovering that that is in fact the case, and coming to the close of that phase is what is usually called realization, or enlightenment, or what have you. But it's not the end of the process, so to speak, because this is process. This is its own process doing itself. But at that point, you're not doing anything with relationship to anything. You are it. You are reality itself, doing itself, exploring itself, unending it, deepening within itself, unfolding to itself, unending it.
It sounds like that first stage, that booster, I mean, it really seems like a good metaphor, because there's just a lot of force or effort for that. So that it sounds like this first phase is effort, but the second one doesn't sound like it's effort. It sounds like maybe a willingness to be in free fall or something.
It's not even willingness. At that point, willingness is irrelevant. It can seem effortful. I mean, in actuality, it's all the same, because the effort that is being exerted isn't actually a personal effort. It's intrinsic. But you can certainly say there's a lot more turbulence.
So where are you in that analogy?
Where am I?
Yeah.
Well, that's not important. The important thing is, where are you? I'm in my own universe, so where I am is my problem. Your problem is, where are you?
So the reason that I asked that is because you're saying, like, after the booster seat falls off or whatever, it's never ending unfoldment, but
yes.
There came a moment for you said previously, when there was a moment when you just stopped.
Yeah, sure.
So is that the moment when the booster seat falls away, or is that the moment when you're
Well, if we want to really drive this analogy into the ground, I had two moments. One moment was probably analogous to the rocket blasting off, and the other moment was analogous to the first booster stage falling away in my personal history. But again, you can't be. There's no need to be too literal with the metaphor.
I just don't like the color of my spacesuit.
Sorry, what was that again?
I don't like the color of my spacesuit.
Take it off. Vacuum schmacuum.
It's on the subject of valueless distraction. I'm curious. I'm thinking of alchemy, Peacock's Tail, the Blessed Green, or whatever, 5 stages of enrollment or something. And when Helen's talking about her experiences with light, I'm just wondering if there's some one could like reference to alchemy.
Absolutely, alchemy is not particularly coherent, and there are many strains with alchemy. But the most profound alchemy was about exactly what we deal with here. It was about coming to see what this is. A lot of the prime maxims of alchemy are directly applicable to this work. Some of the alchemical sayings that come to mind are, to make gold you must take gold. So you start with what this is in order to discover what this is. Or another one is the first matter is discarded by everyone as valueless, but the alchemist recognizes what it is and does the alchemical work on it and realizes the philosopher's stone. And likewise, experience itself is the prima materia, and you letting experience develop and become noticing what it is, let it become what it is, so to speak, is the achievement of the philosopher's stone. And if you make a study of alchemy, you'll find, again, because it's not particularly coherent, and it's a hodgepodge of all kinds of different teachings on different levels and from different angles, and a lot of them are proto-chemistry and what have you, so it's very garbled. But if you look at alchemy, you'll find a lot of strains that are very profoundly and very obviously about what we work with here.
This, I mean, this is, I don't know if something you would address now, but the retreat, I'm planning to attend, but I have no idea what it's about.
You'll find out, won't you?
Okay.
It will be different than what we do in these meetings.
Really?
Not for you. You'll just be sitting there stupidly like you. Yeah.
What the heck? Can you talk a little bit about aloneness, loneliness?
Aloneness?
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, this comes up in spirituality because the fact is you are entirely alone in your universe. You alone exist in your world, in your universe. This is the profound fact. This is the ultimate fact. And at a certain point, that can seem to be a big blow. When you realize that, it can seem to be a challenge. It can seem to be a difficulty. Because, of course, that can provoke a sense of loneliness, a sense of loss, or being cast adrift, or being thrown on one's own devices, whatever. But, of course, that's a misunderstanding, because loneliness is predicated on a separation. And the actual aloneness is an aloneness of inclusion. You know, you are alone in your universe, but you include everything within that universe, so you are separate from nothing. So there's no aloneness in the sense of a separation. You are, everyone that appears in your universe, you are them, literally. In fact, you are more intimately related to them than can be imagined in a consensus reality paradigm. And yet you alone exist. But again, it's not an aloneness of separation or an aloneness of distancing from anything that implies a lack or a lessening or a neediness. On the other hand, it's an aloneness of absolute inclusion, an aloneness of fullness, an aloneness of generosity, an aloneness of bounty and fullness. And that is the actuality. And as it is and it's also not an aloneness of how to verbalize this? It's not an aloneness of littleness or of defined. It's not like you're alone. Here I am in me, and I'm little or separate. Or it's an aloneness of unboundedness, of undefinedness, of complexity, of lusciousness, of being able to have just vast different energies and qualities and meaningfulnesses that are not particularly in agreement with each other. So you can have entire symphonies of contradictory meaningfulnesses that you yet include. So again, it's not an aloneness of limitation in any sense, or an aloneness of littleness or containment in any sense. It's an aloneness of vast, inclusive fullness. And it is as it is what it is, and it is inherently a basis for inconceivable completeness and fulfillment and meaningfulness. So if one sees the fact of this aloneness, but it has any taint of loneliness, then it's not being understood as it actually is. as this vast, meaningful, richness of inclusion that it actually is.
I guess, listening to you, I realize it's a matter of different, being different in terms of understanding, realizing certain things that
Uh-huh.
most people don't.
Right.
You just can't talk to hardly anybody about this stuff.
Oh, sure.
And I think that's the part that's hard.
Right. Uh-huh. You can talk to them, but you can't expect them to understand it in a way that you want them to. But that applies to inanimate objects too. You can talk to the wall, but you can't expect it to get what you're saying in a way that you might find satisfying. So the problem there,
But the wall doesn't give me this mystified look.
well, it might be. Depends how you interpret wall expressions, wall body language.
Peter, let me ask you this. Let's say you have, there are two people that you meet. One person that you met, very friendly. Right? Apparently friendly is our interpretation. And then another person that you meet, very hostile.
Uh-huh.
And it's interpretation as well.
Uh-huh.
So what's the differences between these two in actuality?
The difference is,
Yeah, the difference is if you look at what that is, right, in actuality,
it's just different dominant energy resonances.
it's just energy different. I mean,
But the energy isn't necessarily even different, it's just the dominant resonances are different.
It would have a totally, it would have a very different experience.
Yeah, for sure. We can have a different experience, but it's different and it's also the same. It's like asking what's the difference between two waves in the ocean.
Yeah.
In one sense, they're completely different because they're different energy resonances. In another sense, they're the same because they're water, they're the ocean.
And even
There are resonances within the same system, and ultimately, you can find a lot of, even as you can find a lot of differences, you can also find a lot of similarities.
there's not even any, for example, one is pleasant or anything like that, or one is unpleasant.
Well, you can interpret it that way, but that's a vast oversimplification. You know, this is the case because, there's a pragmatism here, because you are an energy system, and so you have a built-in, let's say, inherent, because of the energy system that you are, there is an inherent degree of harmony or disharmony with different energy systems. And you can interpret that as pleasant or unpleasant or like or not like, but it's more like oil and water, say.
Yeah.
So different energies will tend to hit you different ways because of what they are and because of what you are. It's like two dogs seeing each other, or a dog and a cat seeing each other, or what, you can think of all sorts of examples. But because energy systems have a certain sort of a predominant resonance, let's say, then that predetermines how other energy systems they'll interact, what the interaction will be like. One interesting way to look at this, it's fascinating to see this fact. You already have the relationship that you would have with everyone, whether you've met them or not. When you meet someone, you already know who they are the second you see them, and you already know who they are to you the second you see them, because you are what you are and they are what they are, and that energy is obvious, the degrees of consonance and dissonance and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
It's very complex. It's not that you can necessarily encapsulate that and say what it is or analyze it or make sense of it, but there's a knowing right away with people. You just feel the person's energy, and bang, even before you get to know them or have much interaction, you already, it's instant. Yeah, because you know.
Yeah.
It's like the different poles of a magnet. The magnet, the north pole of the magnet doesn't need to look and see if it's the south pole of a magnet. It just goes zoop, because the energy is inherent, and so it does itself.
Yeah.
It doesn't require discovery. It doesn't require exploration. It is already the case. It's inherent. That's what I mean by the word inherent.
Back away.
True. No, but that's how it
I
is.
kind of admonish myself for that. It's not a very I interpret, well, that's
Sure.
not too loving.
Sure, but you know, I mean, and there's what you do about it is another thing, but that also has to do with what the energy system that you are. But you know, fundamentally, all energy systems are already predetermined in their relationship to all other energy systems, and this applies not just to human beings; it applies to any energy. You know, you walk into some room and you go, God, I love this room. You walk into another room and you go, ugh, I hate this place. Or you know, foods. You taste one food and you go, oh my God, and then you taste another food and you know, and because it's because of what it is and what you are, there's energy resonates with itself with degrees of harmony or degrees of dissonance. It's like notes or in a chord, so you can hit.
Harmonic.
Yeah, it's harmonics. You know, you hit two chords, two incredibly complex chords, and there's going to be degrees of consonance and degrees of dissonance that just set up this incredibly sophisticated moire pattern of you know, of a pattern. I mean, it's, you know.
Oh, I never had it worded this way. This is fabulous. And I just never quite understood. It's so distinct.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you can see it, and it's not. It's just the case. Things are what they are, and because they are what they are, they have the relationship to each other that they have, without exploration or development. And then exploration or development is possible within that context, but it's not going to change the fundamental energy dynamic.
Well, I've allowed that to happen and created a judgment, but then I go further, and I have found the energy changing as a result of my listening or getting to know that person more and finding more in them, and then I find that change.
Yeah, because again, all energy systems are infinitely complex and subtle, and so you can kind of selectively tune into different aspects. You know, you can tune into consonances or tune into dissonances and sort of magnify them or zoom in on them, whatever.
And if I could get back to that aloneness and loneliness, I'm pretty interior, so I've always incredibly enjoyed aloneness. It's a tremendous space. But there are times, now that I'm retired, that I'm thinking, gee, I wonder if I'm feeling lonely, because it's such a distinction. And so loneliness to me is, well, there's something wrong with me, and I'm not with somebody. So I find that would be a tremendous distinction. But to me, there's people who aren't that interior, don't really understand aloneness and the enjoyingness and the joy of being alone.
Well, it may or may not. I mean, it's all different.
I mean, people sometimes get a lot of energy from being around people.
Yeah, but you know, aside from personality types and temperaments and such, you know, the fundamental fact is everyone is completely alone in their own universe. It's just a fact. It's an absolute fact. You're the sole and actual inhabitant of your experience, of the world that exists in your experience. The whole universe exists in your experience, and you're the only one there. You know, there are apparent other people and beings showing up in it, but they are only going to show up as your experience, as you, essentially. Like a dream, very much like a dream. You can have a dream, you can be in Times Square and have thousands and thousands of people present, but there's no one there but you, in actuality. And your waking experience is exactly the same, in actual fact. So you are alone, but that's not necessarily a basis for feeling loneliness, like we were talking about. Because you're not actually separate from anything. You're not deprived of anything. You're not cut off from anything. You're not in need of anything. You're not in lack, because you're in a aloneness of fullness, because you have everything. You have everyone, but you have them as you. You have them as your karma, as your pattern. Why don't we have lunch?
Alrighty.
Twist my arm. The best part of the day. Finally something that makes sense. Start up the online here. And start up the audio. Okay.
Out of the conversation about aloneness, this brings up something that isn't new, but it came to mind, and it always boggles me, and I love being boggled, is this notion that you're only having a conversation with yourself as I am.
Well, I'm not even having a conversation because what I am is this field of experience. You are an apparition within this field, just like Peter Brown's an apparition within this field, and the field alone exists, and I am the field of experience. So Peter Brown's having a conversation with you, and I'm watching it all. You might say.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not, that's sort of a heavy-handed way of putting it.
I take it that way.
In other words, in a profound sense, you're not actually here in my experience, but Peter Brown is no more here than you are. So you are an apparition within the karma of myself, just like this is an apparition within the karma of myself. But I am not limited to the karma. I am the entire system within which the karma appears and which generates the karma and which experiences the karma for its own bizarre nature. or what have you. It's like when you dream at night, you may dream you're standing there talking to somebody. They aren't really there, but to you the standing there isn't really there either. Right? You're in bed dreaming or whatever. So anything that appears exists as an apparition, and what you are is the whole system within which it appears, including what appears. Like in a dream, you are what's experienced in the dream, but you are also the dream itself. You're doing the dream. So you're the whole shooting match. Even if you seem to be appearing as you're identifying as one of the apparitions within the dream, more so than another of the apparitions within the dream that you're identifying less with. But in actuality, they're all equally you, and you're the only one there. And exactly the same condition obtains here.
You know, a place I've fallen short looking at this, and when I've had lucid dreams, which I haven't had for a while, but I've had a number over the years, is I go, you're in my dream talking to anybody else. I'll suddenly realize I'm dreaming. You're in my dream, or I am walking in my dream. So I'm still having identification with this entity within the dream.
Right. Yeah, sure. And we can do that here. You can identify as this body, or you can just watch it. You know, I can identify as the speaker from this body, or I can just watch it happening. And it's kind of arbitrary, because the viewpoint of identification is very flexible. I can identify with the whole thing. I can see myself literally animating every body in this room, including this one, or I can identify with this body in more of a conventional sort of a paradigm, or I can identify with none of it and see all of these forms as like empty, ghost-like forms that are sort of funnily expressing their own energy resonance. And the point of view is arbitrary, how it's seen from, because there is no absolutely true point of view.
And would you just flow from one point of view to another?
Sure, flow. Yeah, flow is the preferred MO for sure.
So, on that note, there's no real ultimate meaning whether there's resonance or dissonance between the patterns.
Correct. The meaning is well, there is meaning, but it's a very non-linear inherent meaning. The meaning is like the meaning of a symphony.
Right, so it's not the meaning that the mind would normally
Right.
you know, like, oh
Totally.
gosh, I should have.
Yeah, all of that is pathetically inadequate and not applying.
Yeah, okay.
The actual meaning is like the meaning of a symphony or the meaning of a beautiful sunset or something. It's pregnant with meaning. It's luscious. It's dripping with meaning on all sorts of, dimensions, but it can't be encapsulated in anything that could be said or thought.
So not mind meaning.
Yeah.
Meaning that way.
Mind meaning is a pale, pale, pale stick figure of a reflection. If it's like a 2-year-old draws a stick figure with a circle on top and says, "Look, that's mommy." It's like, well, yeah, it's a representation of mommy, but mommy is, a little different than that. And that's kind of like our elaborate explanations of what's happening and what's important and what our meaning is. It's just like one of those stick figures. No, that's what's important. Yeah, right.
And then a dream figure in the dream, anything it does, such as spiritual practice of which we find great meaning.
Yeah.
All the teachers, any of wherever we seem to find ourselves, how is it that, it can't, to me, it can't be that anything it does has anything to do with waking up. Is that metaphor, or am I off there?
It all has to do with waking up.
It does?
Everything that happens is the unfoldment of your karma, and the very vehicle of waking up is the unfoldment of your karma.
Well, I'm thinking of and maybe this metaphor doesn't hold all the way. If I wake up from a dream at night, whatever the dream character was involved in, I wake up and it has nothing to do with what I am. Oh, but
it doesn't. You are trapped in that, but that was an expression of meaning, of all sorts of non-linear meaningfulnesses that are very important to you, or you wouldn't have dreamed it.
They would be important to who?
To what you are, to the system that dreamed it.
The dream is important too.
Of course. It's not important in the sense that you're stuck in it, or it has repercussions, but it's important as an unfoldment of energies. Exactly what that means can't be said. It's not, when I say unfoldment of energies, that's obvious sort of bullshit, and intentionally so, because you can't say what it is. But nonetheless, there is nothing that is meaningless. Everything is profoundly meaningful, but in a completely non-linear, non-causal way that doesn't make sense within any human paradigm.
Right, so that non-causality is more conceptual than actual.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not that it's non-causal, it's just that causality and non-causality have nothing to do with it. It's something that's completely other than that.
I had an experience once where there wasn't any perceive or perceived,
Right.
and the story had nothing to do with, absolutely nothing with the story. There was
Right.
no sense of a self, and the whole
Right.
story had nothing to do with what I was, which was everything.
Sure.
I don't know how to say it really.
Yeah.
But
Well, it's
from
like
I
that.
gathered that it didn't seem that anything that character was into was particularly relevant.
Well, it's not relevant in a linear sense, and it's not relevant in a logical sense. But one way to put it is, every single experience you have is profoundly meaningful and important. You look out the window and you see a particular leaf on a particular bush that happens to be exactly that particular way at the moment you glance at it, is important to you, or it wouldn't be there. Or you might say, when you dream at night, everything that the dreaming consciousness puts in the dream, it puts there for a reason. It puts there because it's important. So you dream you're driving along and you glance out the window and there's a cow in the field or something, right? Whatever. That's like totally important.
But not in the way the mind
Right.
interprets.
Exactly. Completely non-linear, completely irrationally, not in any way you can wrap your head around it, even slightly.
In what way is it important?
Well, it can't be said. It's important as a vehicle of expressing your meaningfulness, which is the very vehicle of your own unfoldment. In other words, the patterns that you experience in your experience, the very fact that you experience them is the vehicle of your own unfoldment. In a way that is undescribable and irrational and doesn't make any sense. And that includes everything you experience. It's not like in your experiencing, this and that matters and the rest of it is just background. There is no background. Everything is precisely and inconceivably important and meaningful.
I've been trying to make it unimportant.
Well, it's not important in a human sense. In a human sense, it's completely unimportant. Human logic has it completely ass backwards.
I know you've elaborated on this before, but I need to have repeated that. We really, in a way, don't have choice or will, that we are on a path, maybe a predetermined path, and what's going to happen, what is happening, is supposed to happen.
Yeah, sure. You can look at it
I
that
know,
way.
but I need to have it drilled in. I need to have you expound.
No, this is this is all,
And I
everything.
wouldn't admonish myself so much for certain things to find, well, this is supposed to happen, this is your path, your lesson,
Yeah.
whatever.
Everything that happens whatsoever within your universe is doing itself in the most efficient way for you to become what you are becoming. And it all is completely relevant to that process. It is the very vehicle of that process, and it's doing itself, and it's doing exactly the right thing at exactly the right time, and not in any way that makes any sense or that you can get a handle on, of course.
That's the key, yeah.
Because again, human models, human paradigms, have absolutely no applicability to what this actually is. What's going on here is completely beyond the scope of the most wild human philosophies and imaginings. But you don't need to approach it in those terms, because you yourself are completely beyond the wildest imagination of the most elaborate human conceptualizations. So you have astounding, hyperdimensional and nonlinear and hyper-intelligent resources that you inherently are bringing to bear in creating and experiencing this whole thing. Yeah. What's going on here is huge and profound, and human logic trivializes it so pathetically.
So it's not relevant to the self that the mind is perceiving. It's not relevant to that. It's relevant to
Oh yeah, to what you are, to
what you are,
the you, the real you.
Profoundness
Yeah.
of that, not.
Oh yeah.
The tendency is to think it's relevant to this, contracted, whatever.
Yeah. But that's just but the contracted separate individual is just a fantasy. It doesn't really exist.
Right, but the perception of meaning tends to be
Right.
funneled through that.
Yeah, well, in terms, again, but from a human paradigm, yeah.
Yeah.
The human paradigm is oriented around the human character in a human environment, and none of that stuff actually exists. That's all gross misinterpretations of what's actually the case. But it's not a problem because it exists within the context of that. That doesn't go away. That's actually happening, and eventually, the human intelligent, the human orientation comes to that by its very nature. You could think of it as like a chick breaking out of an egg. For some reason, this consciousness identifies itself in a human form as part of its process of self-unfoldment, which involves discovering it's much more than, vastly more than that. But it seems to be an intrinsic part of that process, unfathomable.
I'm listening to you, and I hear people making up stories, explanations, and I hear those like they don't make sense at all. There's no basis in fact.
Yeah.
And I just wonder what causes people to do that.
Well, it's part of our process. It's part of our process as human beings to go through this phase of analysis and orienting towards exploring things in terms of various models that may hypotheses that may be interesting to explore. And eventually, of course, as we mature, we naturally transcend and outgrow that sort of a heavy-handed approach. But at a certain point, it makes sense to do it that way, and in fact, it may be necessary and intrinsic to do it that way, in the same sense that, if you look at the way 4-year-olds behave, you'd say, God, these people are behaving really incompetently compared to an adult. But it's quite appropriate for them to behave in that way because that's the phase they go through, and which brings them to becoming an adult. And a similar pattern could be said to exist in terms of spirituality, where as this transcendence explores itself and comes to approach itself, it does so by very sort of heavy-handed, immature means and sort of mechanisms at first, as it develops subtlety and develops nuance and develops the ability to handle non-linearities that are necessary for it to come to itself as it actually is.
So I am gonna become something.
Sorry?
I am gonna become something.
You're going to become you. Always have been.
I was interested in your analogy about the booster and then the rocket
Oh, yeah, yeah.
going on. And I was looking at my own self in that regard. I certainly know the booster part where I've, done different exercises and different pursuits and have gotten, and what for me is more meaningful is like I've gotten in a boat and I rowed out to the middle of the river, and now I have a choice. Do I go beyond sort of this practical approach? And for years I was afraid to go beyond, and I just rode back. But that's not true anymore. But I do go back. I go out further, and I stay there for a while, and then I go back. So you can't do that with a rocket.
Sure. I mean, again, it's important not to be too literal with these analogies.
Yeah.
But that's fine. I mean, any way of this being with itself is any way of this being with itself is a viable vehicle for it to discover itself, and it will find its own path that is most effective for it. And it can look like that. It can look a lot like that. It can look like, explorations that have a degree of tentativeness about them, but that have a kind of a cumulative quality, and that's fine. It doesn't have to be one way or another. It doesn't have to conform to anything, because it intrinsically finds its own appropriate expression. And the point of the rocket ship metaphor wasn't so much the number of boosters or anything, as I was trying to indicate that different approaches are appropriate at different phases of your unfoldment, and it's not like the one size fits all where you do one thing and it's just that's what you're always doing. It's the case that, in point of fact, you may do one approach, you may do completely the opposite approach at another phase of your unfoldment, and it's quite appropriate to do so. Certain phases may demand a lot of effort and investment and intensity. Other phases may involve a lot of letting go and kicking back and going with the flow, or whatever. And that's all fine. So the point is to be intelligently responsive, to work with what is you're engaged with, rather than to be a slave to formula and just this is the way to do it. I have to do it. I have to keep doing it this way. Because no, things change. You can change. You can find yourself in a different circumstances. If it's raining, you might want an umbrella. If it's sunny, you might want sunglasses. You can be flexible. You can work with the conditions that present themselves and work with the needs that seem to be coming up in terms of what you're working with, and so on and so forth. One thing that is absolutely true is we're always forging into new territory. We never know where we are because we're always someplace new. So the conditions that present themselves are always unfamiliar and will always present new conditions and invite or demand new responses and new tricks from you in terms of participating with them. So you're always in a wild disassociation where you never really know quite where you are, and it's something new, and new conditions are emerging, and new abilities within you, and potential responses are emerging, and it's a dance of spontaneity, a dance of exploration in newness, always. So formula doesn't apply except as a sort of a very coarse and general rule of thumb kind of a thing. But in actuality, moment by moment, or day by day, or week by week, or year by year, it's a matter of intelligent responsiveness to what seems to be actually happening. It's like an improvisation, a spontaneous improvisation, rather than a dull plodding application of a formula.
I've been seeing lately that my mind, will do its thing about, especially when there's a lot of problems, but simultaneously, something I would call my life force or whatever,
Sure.
is finding beauty in everything.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, and they're both coexisting.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they exist on countless parallel dimensions, or parallel, not necessarily even parallels. We exist in different realms that may or may not have anything at all to do with each other, and they each have different functionalities and different flavors and different, potentialities and everything, and it's all an ongoing mishmash that doesn't particularly make a lot of sense.
Let's talk about something, to me it's subtle, and I'm sort of struggling to find words for it. It looks to me like there's a visceral feeling, first experience a sensation, like nonverbal or pre-verbal. And then I look for words to describe it. And I'm wondering how that sounds to you, sense any meaning to you what you're talking about.
Oh, sure. Our primary intelligence, our inherent intelligence, is very irrational, very nonverbal, very directly engaged, very nonlinear and multidimensional, and it is intimately and profoundly engaged with our being and our experiencing in real time, directly. And conceptual formulations and descriptions and all that follow as a sort of a pale shadow or reflection of that, and you can't ever really capture the subtlety and nuance, even remotely, of that primary engagement of our irrational intelligence. We are most powerful as irrational beings. We are much less powerful and functional as rational beings. And acknowledging that and realizing that enables us to embrace our own greatest effectiveness. If we have all our eggs in the basket of our rationality and our logical functioning, we're crippling ourselves. We're cutting ourselves off from our greatest strengths, which is this astounding nonlinear intelligence that makes absolutely no sense and cannot be verbalized and so on and so forth, and yet is most profoundly engaged with our actual experience and our actual functioning.
Like awareness, the difference between the straight awareness and trying to describe it.
Sure.
It's like laughing and then trying to describe what you were laughing about.
Yeah, of course. Because reality itself is so multidimensional that rational intelligence can't scratch the surface of incorporating all that. But our inherent intelligence is also multidimensional, so it can be there with that irrationally on a multi-level, multi-dimensional way. Again, that it can't be captured in words or ideas. But we live in both worlds. We have both those modes and many others available within our bag of tricks, so to speak.
That leads me to another place. I've occasionally had the experience with another person. What I'm going to call, it's like quiet, and yet there is a sensation of another person without words.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
It's like, best words I have is pure being. Mm-hmm. It's really strange. Sometimes I can't be talking, and that sense is underneath it.
Sure.
Sure. What do you think? What does that mean to you? This is a recent new thing for me.
Yeah. Well, you know, again, it's hard to verbalize, but you could say that the energy interaction occurs again very multidimensionally and non-linearly on all sorts of levels, so to speak. And again, this is very vaguely and not inaccurately put. And this is the case, whether we notice it or not. When we're more identified with our conscious mind, we tend to notice it less because we tend to be more focusing on words people are saying and so on. But when you just notice the fullness of your experience, you notice there's all sorts of flavors and subtleties and nuances that are conveyed in the interaction of any energy systems, other beings, so on and so forth. Then there's not necessarily any limit to how broad or how deep that communion and that communication can be.
It's been amazing.
It's completely amazing. And, you know, one of the most amazing things is everyone's always doing that, and yet most people tend to not notice that as much because of their fixation on identifying with their conscious mind and so on. But in actuality, we're always, but this is, you know, if you think about it, it's self-evident. You walk into a room and someone's sitting there, and you know right away, before either of you said a word, what you think of them. You know, in some sense, right? That you just get a hit on their flavor. You know, like you just sort of feel, you know, you feel like, you know, the chemistry is sort of a way that's put popularly, vaguely. And you know, it's self-evident that this is the case, and it is the case profoundly, and can be, and again, there's no limit to the profundity of the depth with which that can be participated in. You know, it's the basis of genuine spiritual communication. Verbal communication is largely ineffectual spiritually. The important communication spiritually comes on a level of direct energy interaction. Arbitrarily, we don't have words for what this is, but that's where the power and the intimacy comes in, and the real empowerment. That's the difference between words and who says them. You know, anyone can say a string of words, but you can tell what that is connected with in the person that says them, and if it's connected with something deep, it has a lot more power and sort of efficacy, you might say, than if it's someone who's just parroting some phrase or something. You know, the words may be equally useful or true or accurate or whatever, or pithy, but if it doesn't have that substratum of authority associated with it, it doesn't have the impact. But this is self-evident within everyone's experience on every level. I think we all experience this, but typically it's not acknowledged in this culture because we think it's a largely materialistic culture, and we think of ourselves as material beings, and so if it's not, you know, through the senses and through the mind, then it doesn't exist, you know, which is of course very silly. I think most primitive cultures acknowledge much more explicitly these kinds of energy interactions and so on and so forth.
I don't know, the word primitive is,
Sure.
we aren't more primitive than some of these.
Sure. Yeah, sure. It's all pretty arbitrary.
Yeah.
Well, it's like when I was in Australia, the Aborigines, not what they do now, but they did have a dream state. And they sit around and they all have the same collective dream.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, you know, what a different culture that we can, you know,
Sure.
hard for us to understand.
Sure.
And they knew every blade of grass. I mean, they just knew their environment in a way that we don't.
Yeah, well, they have a different paradigm. Yeah. But you're not constrained to just because it's a popular culture you're immersed in, it forces a more or less coherent paradigm. You're not constrained to abide by it yourself. Mm-hmm. I mean, it might behoove you to abide by it sufficiently to not get locked up or whatever. But other than that, you know, you're free to to roll your own, so to speak. And of course, this is what this meeting is about. It's an invitation to break out of what you've been fed, what you've been brainwashed into, and to discover if there's other possibilities that may be to your advantage to explore.
You talk about process,
Uh-huh.
and sort of like this evolutionary. Would it be, because it seems very spontaneous and sort of, it almost seems like the process is like a thread that the seeming self notices. Meanwhile, there's this other thing that sort of spontaneously, I don't know, maybe that doesn't make sense. There's something that feels odd to me with the whole process conceptually.
Sure. Well, it's a vague euphemism, and it's deliberately vague because it's not really a process. It's just a way of getting a handle on the notion that something is going on here that is profound, that only makes sense in its own terms, and that includes what we think of as spiritual unfoldment. And so calling it a process is a little heavy-handed and linear, but it's a very inadequate way of indicating that there is something that is meaningful, that is doing itself.
Unfolding.
Sure, I mean, call it unfolding, but even that is sort of a euphemism or a vague metaphor, and it's, you can't pin down exactly what that refers to, or even if it's accurate, but it has some utility, it has some meaningfulness in terms of conveying a sense that there is something happening here, and it's genuine, and it comes from within what you are spontaneously, and is facilitated perhaps by various interactions and explorations and so on and so forth.
No, this is very stimulating stuff, and I'm listening. The word awareness comes in where
Mm-hmm.
and it looks like an underlying thing to everything, like awareness of what's getting in the way of awareness of people. And then the other thing is like there's an aliveness to being aware.
Mm-hmm.
There's this whole business of what does aliveness really mean?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. Aliveness is of the very essence of what this is. This is alive, this is vital, this is dynamic, this is radiance, this is creative, this is spontaneous, this is not static, this is not dull, this is not inactive in any sense. It's most positive in the literal sense of positing dynamism. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm at a point now where if I meet people or see somebody or have an experience with a person, I'm now starting to use that as a criteria. Do I feel alive when I'm in this experience? Do I feel dead when I'm in this?
Sure.
experience.
Sure.
And naturally, I'm hanging out where I feel alive, and sort of avoid situations where I feel dead.
Mhm.
I'm finding it really useful.
Sure, yeah.
Is this equivalent to what some teachers call satari, where you observe and feel a connection that transcends boundaries with any person or object?
Sure. Absolutely. And it may be in the context of a person or object, but it's not really with them, it's with yourself, it's with what you are, what this is. I mean, this being with itself as it is that, even though it will usually look as if it's in the context of being with a person or being with a situation. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Because I'm finding that, yes, when I just observe and breathe, I experience something that, a wider awareness, I guess is the best way to describe it.
Sure.
Yes. Thank you.
Sure. There's no limits to how wide and multidimensional experience is. And it always is that, it already is that. It's just a matter of noticing it. You don't need to achieve it or create it or aspire to it. You just need to notice that it is in fact already the case. And then, you're with this vast fullness, it's completely multidimensional, non-linear, and so on and so forth. And you just need to notice it's there. You don't need to do it. You don't need to create any special qualities or any achieve any particular state or other. We are a vastness, and our mind, if anything, can be a censoring device. So it's not like we're small and we're aspiring to vastness. It's that we're vast, but we don't notice it, and we think we're small because our mind is censoring the vastness and not letting us perceive it, not letting us notice it.
Yeah.
Sure. Typically the mind acts like a censoring device, where what you are intrinsically is a multidimensional vastness. You are that. You always have been that. You always will be that. It's intrinsically what you are. But if you haven't noticed that, it's not because it's not the case, but because your mind is can be a very effective censoring device, where it shuts off your sensitivity to what you are and channels your awareness only into very narrow areas, and so that's all you let yourself notice. But you already are this vast multidimensionality, so you don't need to create that or aspire to that or achieve it. All you need to do is notice that it is in fact already the case, and then you can explore that and participate in that.
But how do we breaking through this censorship of this crazy mind?
Yeah.
Well, this is what we've been talking about. And the easiest way to do it is to go to any direct experience, any actual experience, and notice that it is non-linear, that it does not conform to a mental concept, that it is open-ended, that it is spontaneous, and so on and so forth. Actuality of experience reveals multidimensionality.
It still takes a lot of maturity to see little by little.
Yeah, but there's no way around that. It's like a bunch of 6-month-old children saying, "Yeah, but how do you walk? How do you walk?" It seems to take a lot of maturity. Well, yeah, it does. But you'll hit a certain point where you'll start pulling yourself up and start walking. And this is the case. You can't contrive this or fake it. You can't be spoon-fed. But on the other hand, maturity comes when it comes, and then you find yourself approaching this, you find yourself embracing this, exploring it, and then all of a sudden this becomes very meaningful and doable. Just like you reach a certain point and walking becomes very doable. You reach a certain point and sexual relations become very doable, and so on and so forth. All these things come spontaneously with maturity, and you can't fake it or contrive it or aspire to it. I mean, you can, but there's no point in it, because until you reach a certain point of maturity, it won't be effective. And spirituality is completely predicated on maturity. And exactly what that means can't be said, but as a generalization, I can say it's true.
We completely reversed the metaphor in terms of maturity. It seems what I'm coming more into is how I experienced as a kid. And there seems to be no, I hate to ask a why question, but there seems to be no functional reason why one should turn off, why wonder should just get turned off or be censored. Why would something so nourishing just like leave? I mean, there's nothing I can't figure out. I can't see any value in it.
Take it up with the management.
I have. They're not talking. They're not open to suggestions.
Bastards. 1%, I tell you.
No, really good. But I mean, as an organism, we are pleasure-seeking organisms, and being open and not self-centered, not in the psychological way, but being more part of the field is certainly fulfilling and nourishing.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And that other stuff is a bunch of shit. Why would we even need to thaw that out if we start out that way with that kind of grace?
Sure. Well, you can't make sense. Can't make sense of it, but it's observably and empirically a part of our process.
Part of our what?
Process. I mean, virtually everyone goes through that. Virtually everyone starts in a condition of openness and wonder and amazement, and virtually everyone gets seduced into some degree of encapsulating themselves within worldviews and semantic prisons and so on. And some people, when they reach a certain point of maturity, have the wisdom, wit, or grace to begin to question that and move beyond it. And arguably something is gained through that whole arc. But who knows? All we can do is just say that it seems to be the case. And at any rate, the point is more what to do about it and how to do about it than why, of course.
Peter, do you feel that there are more people awakening nowadays than have been before, or it's pretty much the same like it's always been?
I have no idea. I mean, there's some theories about that, but it's not really important anyway, because when someone awakens, it's only them that awakens. Even if a million other people are also awakening, it's irrelevant. When you awaken, it's about you awakening. And whether anyone else awakens or no one else awakens or a billion people awaken, it doesn't matter at all.
You don't think that the world, though, is changed by more awakening people?
I don't think the world is changed by anything. I think the world is generated for our convenience, for the convenience of our enactment, and that is the very you might say the setting or the stage or the props for awakening. But the process of awakening includes unawakening. So unawakening is a big part of awakening. So the fact that there's a lot of unawakened people around means that there's a lot of awakening process around. But and so judging it on the basis of what phase it's at in any given case is sort of arbitrary.
Mm-hmm.
Awakening is the only game in town. That's what life is. Life is in a constant process of awakening to itself. In the case of we humans, that seems to take place over a long term and catastrophically. but not necessarily for other life forms. But again, it's not a cumulative thing because it's always an individual thing. When one person awakens, the entire universe is what's the word? Redeemed is not the right word. The entire universe it realizes its purpose. And when more people are awakened, it's not more, it's the same. Because it's always a one-off.
So there goes the 100th monkey theory.
I know, right?
I don't know that theory either.
You don't know that theory?
No.
It's a theory in biology that it's rather fascinating. It has observed some, I mean, I don't know if this is apocryphal or if it actually happened, but some biologists studying monkeys in Madagascar or whatever were watching, this one monkey who figured out how to do something. He figured out how
to rinse the dirt off of a potato.
Okay, whatever. Anyway, and then he taught, and another monkey that saw him doing it learned how to do it, and another monkey that saw him. Well, let me finish. Another monkey saw him doing it and learned how to do it, and that sort of went on, and they reached a certain threshold, arbitrarily, say 100 monkeys, who knew how to do this. All of a sudden, all the monkeys on the island knew how to do it, whether they'd seen it or not. And this is called the 100th monkey principle. 100th monkey principle, whereby when sufficient number of people get something, somehow it permeates spontaneously through the entire population. Yeah, whatever. Anyway, that's the theory. And we just demolished it, so who cares? I don't know that we demolished it.
You're counting awakened beings that I know. I'm up to 73,
Right, okay, come on, keep going, guys. I'm rooting for you. Only a few more to go. Well, who knows? Who knows? Maybe.
Hurry up with the counting there, Dave.
But again, a group phenomenon is not important because it's always individual. Awakening is always on an individual basis.
So when certain spiritual teachers say, it's important that each one of us awakens so that it produces this cumulative effect and blah blah, that's just some lies that some people need to hear in order to feel
I think so.
Like that jolt to awaken to, if it's going to help humanity, then I better get to it.
Humanity doesn't need help. Humanity is being done by the absolute with extreme precision and inconceivable artfulness. So there's nothing needs to be changed. Everything's exactly right.
Yeah, which is why it's almost like a trick they play on you, kind of like, well, if you're coming from that perspective, I'll give you that, so that you can be motivated.
Who knows?
Along the same line is when you hear when it's taught that this is consciousness revealing itself to itself.
Mm-hmm.
And so as it's happening, there's more of it going on. You know what I mean? It's like more people are awakening because we're all the one consciousness.
Yeah, but it's not like that. The problem is it's not really like that, and the way it is like can't be said. There's only one consciousness, but it's you, and there's only one consciousness, but it's me. And how does that work? That makes no sense. Well, it makes no sense, but it happens to be true.
Is it the same consciousness?
You can't say that. It's not the same, it's not different. It's not anything. There's no such thing as consciousness. You have to understand, first of all. Consciousness is one of the biggest bugaboos in spirituality.
What? Is that versus unconscious?
Consciousness is like self. It doesn't actually exist. It's an inference, it's an imputation that is a logical construction that doesn't have any actual being. you know, it's very, because again, what's happening here is too weird, it's too strange to wrap your head around. So consciousness kind of makes sense. Well, yeah, there's a consciousness that perceives phenomena, and this phenomena being perceived by consciousness. Okay, that kind of makes sense. But it's not really like that. There is no consciousness. There's just presence. And does presence perceive itself? Well, what we call perceiving happens, and what we call phenomena happens, but it's all just presence. How does that work? It makes no sense. Yeah, it makes no sense. Just how it is. But again, what this is makes absolutely no sense. It's completely, you know, it's beyond nuts. It's just, it's inconceivable. It's not inconceivable in a weak sense. It's inconceivable in the strongest possible sense. It's beyond bizarre. You know, unity and multiplicity is another one. You know, it's easy to like you know, this whole issue. Well, if one person gets enlightened, that benefits everyone. You know, because there's no everyone. When I say you're the only one here, I mean that literally. You're literally the only one here.
So I'm dreaming it all.
Yes. And I'm the only one here, and I'm dreaming all the people. But we're not both here. That makes no sense. It's mind-boggling, but it's true. And what's happening here is weirder than weird. When I say it's inconceivable, I really mean it. I'm not just using that as a vague sort of a hyperbole. You know, what's happening here is very, very, very bizarre. And I can't say any more about that, so I won't.
So you use the word energy to be present?
Sure. Presence is energy, you can say that. I call, technically when I try and describe the presence, I describe it as radiant presence. Or it could be called energetic presence or radiant energy.
So when I dream of someone who's giving me flack, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I mean that's me dreaming them up to give me flack,
Yeah,
whatever I
but
do
you're also
that
dreaming.
for.
You're also dreaming up you to get the flack, because you're dreaming you just as much as you're dreaming them, and neither you or you're not here, they're not here, space isn't here, time isn't here. You also dream them up to make the whole thing hang together. And so what's actually happening can't be said. So what do you get? There's no you, no others, no space, and no time. Well, obviously, you sort of can't talk about it too much. It is reality. That's what's really here. That's all that's really here.
So it's all a farce.
It's not a farce because, I mean, yes, you could say it's a farce, but it's a meaningful farce. It's an important. It's a farce that is being enacted for a profound and meaningful purpose, let's say. It's not a simplistic purpose in the sense of cause and effect. Let's just say it's profoundly meaningful.
Okay. And do you have an idea of what the purpose is? I mean,
It can't be said. It's not a purpose. It's a purpose. It's a thing. The purpose is the divine realizing itself, the divine appreciating itself. You could say. I mean, that's a poetic sort of a way to put it. And so all of this is enacted, apparently, for that purpose. And on infinite dimensions and with infinite individualities, but it's not like there is a lot of, there's actually no individualities, and yet there's infinite individualities. That makes no sense. Yeah, it makes no sense. You know, and you alone exist, but I alone exist. That makes no sense. Yeah, that makes no sense. You know? And every quark is the whole universe. You know, and that makes no sense, but it's true. Yeah, it makes no sense. I mean, when I say that this is inconceivable, I mean this is inconceivable. This is fucking weird. This is really, really, really bizarre. You know what's going on here. I mean, it's completely dizzying. I mean, that's literally the case. You know, and as you look into it, you will discover that that is the case. But our simplistic notions of, well, we're all here, and I mean, you know, there's this space, and we're all in it, and we're all individuals, and all of that is entirely inaccurate.
Well, there's this concept of presence or consciousness, whatever. I know there's no such thing as consciousness. But, but,
Okay.
anyway, anyway, shining through all these different forms, the same
okay, let's say the same energy
Sure.
shining through all these different forms,
Mhm.
and people, animals, inanimate objects.
Sure. Except there aren't really any forms. But yeah. It's like in a dream. In a dream, the meaningfulness of the dream is shining through all the forms that are present, but there aren't really any forms that are there. You wake up and you notice there was nothing there. There was no space there. There was no time there. There were no beings there. There was just a shining that looked as if it was all those things. Looked as if it was multiplicity. There's no multiplicity there. So this looks as if it's all these various ways, but it's not actually like that.
So it sounds as if I'm awake, pretending I'm asleep so I can teach myself how to wake up.
Sure. Sure, that's a good way to put it.
Peter, there's not awake, whatever we use the word awake is never not awake.
Yeah, awake and not awake is too simplistic. It's not like that. It's all very slippery and paradoxical, and you can't wrap your head around it. Because this is always completely engaged with itself, and yet it plays a game with itself where it pretends it isn't in order to discover that it is. You know, I mean, the whole thing doesn't make any sense at all. It's just weird.
And you can't get out of it.
Yeah, but there's no it to get out of. You are it, so you're not really in it, so you don't need to get out of it.
But I notice sometimes a sense of fear arising when you talk about multiple dimensions.
Right.
When the perceptual things start getting kind of slippery.
Uh-huh. Yeah, but that's because you're relating to a mode of interpreting it of being more linear as being safer. So you're orienting towards that.
It's more familiar, I mean,
Yeah.
it's the conventional.
Yeah, but that's something that you define into existence. It's not actual. And as you explore these things, if you continue to, the more you play with this kind of non-linearity, the more comfortable you'll become with it, and the more you'll discover, A, it's not threatening at all, and B, it's kind of fun. You know, and C, it actually has a lot of opportunities because you can sort of discover a lot of things and do a lot of things, approach things in different ways that aren't accessible through a more linear approach. But again, you come to that gradually just by exposure.
I've always seen this sort of this big, from years back, big circle with these, what felt like grid, and it felt like this perception was somehow coming through it.
Uh-huh.
And at times, what appears as the grid structure is more or less tangible. I don't know how to say it. And the grid feels like the sense of self in a way, sort of I don't really know what it is, but that's how it feels.
I'm not sure I know what you're referring to, so I can't really comment. Stan?
Well, the things that you point to and that we can't consider, I mean, everything you say is really mind blowing. And when I tap it, when I all of a sudden see it, tap into it, it's like, I go like, whoa, you know? And you were so functional with it. I mean, you're able to you can put a sentence together. And you can put them together really well. I mean, it seems like really normal. You know, it's like.
I've had practice.
No, here I am.
When I first saw this, I spent 5 weeks in a mental institution. So count yourself lucky.
It seems like the dream analogy is so handy.
Absolutely.
But it's handy because it's a reflection. There's some relationship to this whole thing also, right?
Of course. Well, it is this whole thing. The reason why the dream analogy is handy is because it's the one experience that we can look at from the outside. If we could get together when you were asleep and talk about this stuff, then we could look at the waking state from the outside. But we can't do that because when you're asleep, I'm not there. Or I'm not there as anything other than you as a bzzz. Yeah. I'm not there as a body that can apparently communicate, and so on and so forth. So that's why the dreams are so powerful, because we all have the experience of being in a dream and then out of the dream, and And especially the experience of what a dream feels like from within it and what a dream looks like from outside of it is so radically different. It puts a perspective on, by analogy, well, this condition here, we're in it, so it looks a certain way. What would it look like if we weren't in it? And the dream enables us to do that by extension.
Well, if it's true that what I perceive is all not so, I mean,
Yes.
not alive, then
Well, it's all alive. It's all life itself, but it's not separate life forms.
so your words are my manufacture. I mean, that's where I get a little lost.
It's not your manufacture like you over there and me over here.
Yeah.
The words are being manufactured by what you are for you to realize yourself.
But they're coming from you.
It looks that way.
It seems to be happening to all of us.
Simultaneously.
It looks that way. But for you, it may look like all, but for you, all you know is for you. You hear these words. You don't really know for a fact everyone else hears them. They look as if they are, but how can you really know? Maybe they aren't really here. Maybe you're dreaming.
Peter, one time you said that you can tell who is awake. I know, I was like, can you also look at each person and say what's blocking them from seeing what they need to see? Can you actually look at a person
Maybe a psychic.
and
Yeah.
and see where they're getting confused?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
I have been all day. I have been all day. That's what I do.
It's like John of God.
Peter of God.
But then we leave without knowing.
Do you?
This is the student thing first.
Maybe you got a little knowing in the process.
But somehow when you talked about how we can't say what this is, and you talk about how very strange it is, and
Mm-hmm.
there's a part of me that knows that and has seen
Mm-hmm.
that,
Yeah.
but I can't, but it's like crazy making.
But that's the point. Yeah, it is. It's nuts. And that's the point, is to acknowledge that is there and come to appreciate it on its own terms without expecting to either be able to make sense of it or to rationalize it and just deny it. The point is that, yeah, this makes no sense and it's dizzying and it's crazy making for sure, and it'll drive you nuts if you try and make sense of it. But if you sort of sneak up on it and just be with the fact and realize, well, I don't need to make sense of this, it's just weird, and so what's wrong with a little weirdness? What isn't weird? I mean, look around you, you know, think, what's not weird about this bizarre situation? And so, well, so in noticing that that's the case enables you to open to it, and opening to it enables you to incorporate it just organically, and incorporating it enables you to begin to acknowledge and move into that kind of functioning, which expands your sense of yourself, expands your repertoire of engagement with your life, and so on.
There's a certain thing, it feels like almost like static, or sound like.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's the energy.
Sure, that's the energy, yeah. That's the
Sound of
energy.
the energy, and it's like my energy right here is pulling my hair. So this static is just like this buzzing or humming or whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's just like crazy making.
It's not crazy making. It doesn't make sense, and you can't make sense of it, and it doesn't fit into anything. But that's the revelation that's what this is. This doesn't make sense, and you can't fit it into anything. But it's actual. And so you sort of, oh, okay, that's interesting. And then you kind of relax into that mode of, wow, there's a lot here that's just weird and doesn't make sense. Okay. And then you're sort of open to that and relax with that and be with that, and you incorporate that into your reality instead of being something that freaks you out or that you have to not notice most of the time or whatever. And that proves to be an advantage, because all this non-linearity contains a lot of intelligence and contains a lot of meaningfulness and contains a lot of functionality, non-linear functionality that is very advantageous. The very essence of liberation is non-linearity. Liberation consists of being able to be with this horrible human condition and realize that you're not really in this horrible human condition. And there's no way you can do that if you insist on making sense of things.
Yeah.
So discovering that you don't need to make sense of things gives you access to modes of seeing and engagement that make no sense. So all of a sudden your rules are different. Your playbook is very different. All of a sudden you can do the impossible. You can do things that you wouldn't have been able to do if you insist on being rational or being logical.
Yeah, the problem with this particular mind is that it wants to understand that question why.
Right.
Why,
Sure.
I want to,
Yeah.
sort of the scientific
Yeah.
part.
Don't worry, it'll go away.
Thank you.
After you butt your head up against it long enough and you realize that ain't gonna happen.
Yeah, I believe I get it. I'm at the point now where when I'm waking up in the morning, my mind is looking for issues, for drama, and when one pops up, rather than trying to understand it with my mind, all I do is acknowledge and breathe, and then the negative feeling subsides. It goes away.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, great. Yeah.
Yeah, you had mentioned that about 5 weeks in a mental institution. I've heard that many times by people that have had very deep awakenings.
Uh-huh.
So it's normal.
I can only speak for myself. It was normal for me.
What did you say?
I can only speak for myself. It was obviously normal for me, but I can't really speak for anyone else. I mean, I can say one thing from my experience is that everyone's sort of path or mode or experience of awakening is unique and different. So it's not like it has to look like this or it has to look like that. I mean, that's a big mistake people make all the time is they look at the life of some yogi or other and say, oh, such and such happened to him, so I'm not going to make any progress until such and such happens to me. And that's not true at all. You know, some people can have these incredibly turbulent, difficult awakenings that last for decades, and other people can sort of, walk out their front door one day and all of a sudden, bang, everything's hunky-dory. Or whatever, what happens, happens. So the point isn't to think about what it looks like or sort of have expectations of what sort of things you need to be going through or can expect to be going through, so much as to just be with this spontaneity and unfold into it in your own manner, which you spontaneously will, of course. So fortunately, you don't even need to do anything about it.
Well, it's not a hard doing anyway.
Yeah.
Directed.
Yeah.
One time I was watching TV. It has this fantastic music show. It's very loud and people get emotional. So was during the break, and then I turned my face towards the other wall and closed my eyes. All of a sudden, I saw those unspecifiable. You can't say what it is.
Yeah.
So much going on when my eye was closed.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't even say what it is. It's just that it's impossible to say anything about it's just so much dynamic movement. I can't say it's maybe I don't know.
Yeah, sure.
And sometimes I can see this thousands of light, but very, very fine line of light. And normally I wouldn't be able to notice, but it's just that by chance when I saw it, I may see, like a blank, it's black or what, but if you look into it, so much going on in it. And it's mind-boggling.
Yeah.
There's one thing about, I want to ask you about the light. When I have a lot of image going on in my head, with my clothes, I can see all kinds of image from whatever the show I was watching, and it's so dynamic, so interesting. But in the split second, it's all the light. It's so much light and going on so bright and it's going a lot of movement.
Yeah.
So that makes me thinking, okay, it's so obvious that the thought has to be the light.
Yes.
Not only the thought, also the image.
Yes,
it
exactly.
has to be the light.
Yes.
It's nothing else.
Right.
Yeah, I just the turns so quickly.
And that's always the way to go, is move from what something seems to be to the light. Because everything is light. And so when anything seems to be something, see through what it seems to be to the light that it is.
Right. I heard, I asked some people who, what they see in everything. And this person said, everything is light. And I saw that on that one article in the back of your website. It said something about the thought is the kind of blue light. I saw it. It is blue light. But I don't have that access often as I want to, and especially when in the movement and the daylight and I have my eye open, I can't see it.
Yeah, but you can't. But it's possible, and that's the important thing: is to know that it's possible. And to go there often enough so that you really get it, so you really know. So even if you're not looking at it, I know for an absolute fact there's nothing here but a field of light. I know it. I can experience it in a second, go to it, or I can sit here and sit with you all and have this conversation. But to me it's irrelevant. I don't need to do the one or the other because they're the same to me. And that's the point: is to see what this really is, and then you discover it is nothing but light, it is nothing but radiance. Literally, that's the only thing that's present. Your experience is made of radiance, this buzzing, alive, tingling radiance, pure and simple. And when you discovered that, how problematic can the issues of life be if they're just light, if they're just tingling radiance existing in your experience instantaneously with no echoes or repercussions.
Well, probably that's what the Chinese the Zen master says: see the mountain, and then it's not mountain, and then it's mountain again. So it's very deeper meaning. It has very profound meaning because literally it is not mountain.
Literally, it's not a mountain, but it doesn't need to not be a mountain.
Right.
You don't need to not see the mountain. You just need to know that it's not a mountain.
See,
and then you can climb it, hang out on a picnic on it, buy it and sell it, make a profit.
That's what I meant. In this month, also I heard what you were talking about. It has such profound meaning to it.
No,
but I don't hear it until maybe in a certain point.
You can't.
After the entire body is pains everywhere. All of a sudden I heard it.
Well, that's how it is. That's how it is. You can't hear this stuff until you're ready to.
Right.
I mean, you'll the truth has been told forever. All sorts of great teachers have said very, very profound, naked teachings of the truth, and all sorts of people have read them. How come they? But you can't hear it. You can't get what it's about until you're ready to. It's not about the saying. It's about the hearing, and you can't hear it until you're ready.
Okay, I'm trying to figure this out, and it's not a good thing, but so light, I get all senses are radiant. Like the sensation of thought is radiant. The sensations in my body are like amorphous, radiant things. The hearing the different frequencies is radiant. But it's not light. I mean, there's light. That's...
No, by light I mean a euphemism for radiance.
Okay, so I'm okay with it because they appear different in the different
Yes, radiance can appear as anything, but when I say they're light, they're what light is. Light is radiance. Light is, it's nice to, or I should say, it's traditional to use light to refer to the radiance because the characteristics of light very clearly reveal the characteristics of radiance. But you're absolutely right. It's not that you need to take your other experience and somehow shoehorn it into being light.
Right.
But what that actually is and what light is are one and the same. You could say it's different frequencies or different textures or different bandwidths or different blah blah blah. But all that's just make work. I mean, there's nothing there, so it's not. That's beside the point. The point is not to see the way it's different, to see the way it's the same, because we're experts in how it's different.
Mm-hmm.
But when you see the way in which it's the same, then you get it. And because the real message is this experience, this entire world that you inhabit, is a buzzing, tingling flash of light. Period. And you are a buzzing, tingling flash of light, being done in infinity, miraculously, from itself, within itself, to itself. And that's the true perspective. That's who you are, what you are, where you are, what's happening here. And it has a very different feeling tone than the normal drudgery of being this pathetic half-evolved monkey climbing around on this pathetic degenerating culture in this pathetic poisoned planet and blah 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 blah.
Well, you said to find the similarity between the senses rather than the difference. For me, what I think a mistake, I guess, I make is that I assume that I put the different senses together as if they work together, like the cars making that sound.
Right.
But actually, the senses they don't mix. They only have.
No.
Yeah.
Completely independent.
Yeah. Okay.
And there may be a sort of a circumstantial cross correlation sometimes between some of the sense fields, but you can't draw any conclusions based on that.
Okay.
So, but again, that's not. Again, don't spend too much time on mechanism or trying to sort out the structurality of it. Just go to the real substance of it, and you get this flashing, shining, and that goes to the very core of things. Or I should say, it doesn't depart from the very core of things. And then you are at the core of things. You are at the center of being, which is the divine radiance. I mean, it's absolute transcendence, and inclusive of all elaboration, inclusive of actuality and worlds and beings and what have you.
You were talking to Stan, and he said we used the term buzzing and tingling, which is exactly what has begun to happen to me in the last 5 minutes.
Oh, good.
And my whole body feels that way. And somehow and then of course you want to try to correlate it to something, and it's like the beam me up Scotty thing, with the little pixel, the little,
Sure. Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. Sure. That's a nice image, actually. Yeah, that is what is referred to in some traditions as Kundalini, which is what your experience is made of. The experience is made of this. A subtle transdimensional radiant energy that is essentially a buzzing and tingling. And experiencing it as a buzzing and tingling is beginning to experience it much more primally as it is, which is the doorway to liberation. So if you go into that and begin to experience your experience as all that and see that the totality of your experience is actually that, it's actually made of that. You feel the vision is made of a buzzing and tingling. You feel the touch is made of a buzzing and tingling. You feel the hearing is, and so on and so forth. When you see the truth of that, you get the true perspective of what you are and where you are, and which is what is the basis for and the substance of liberation.
This feeling or this event that happened to me several years ago that was of a very spiritual nature. One of the things that happened to me was I felt like this rush of energy that was coming from, I could only explain it as from the base chakra through the crown chakra.
Sure.
And I don't know that much about chakras. you know, it was like this raging river of
Sure.
energy.
Mm-hmm.
And, but I don't remember feeling this where my whole body was just like tingling and like buzzing.
Yeah, it can feel very different ways in different times and different circumstances of its unfoldment. But the important thing isn't to typecast it or to see it as this or that. The important thing is to become sensitive to it and aware and notice its vitality, its aliveness, its buzzing, its dynamism. And then notice it to some degree. To some degree, it's always present, even if it's subtly or in the background, or just you notice it once in a while. And eventually, you begin to notice how it permeates your experience, and your experience is this buzzing and tingling. And then you live in a world of living energy instead of living in a world of things and people and situations and problems. Which is the actual condition. You actually do live in a world of buzzing energy, of dynamic aliveness.
And it feels like, you know, like, I don't know, just, you know, like nothing else really has a meaning.
Yeah,
like
of course.
Life, this whole life from the time that I was born and all the things surrounding, you know, none of it really has any significance or meaning.
That's why it's liberation. Because you stop giving a shit. You know, the technical way of describing liberation is you don't give a shit. And when you see it's all light, it's pretty hard to give a shit. It's all light and it's all you.
And so then will the thing, the life, like, that's just another phase of it? Or
That's the finish line. You're doing great.
Oh.
Stay with that.
By 77 funky?
98.
You know, it's interesting to listen to this because I watched you online for a couple of years, and the initial thing that interested me was your description of light and movement. Because when I had an experience 30 years ago, which I was completely certain I was going crazy because there was so much, I mean, it was so crazy. But anyway, was of this completely, and I still see it, but I had sort of moved my awareness away back, trying to become sane again, really.
Sane.
Yeah, but it's something that I do continue to see,
Yeah.
and it's just completely alive.
Yeah.
It looks like light molecules
Yeah.
constantly, and I feel it sensationally. It doesn't mean I don't get caught in mind stuff, but it's interesting to hear you say that because I really work very hard to try to refocus out of things looking so transparent.
Pity.
Yeah, because I mean, you know, I had no background in metaphysics.
No, of course, you wouldn't know. Yeah, of course. I think that's very typical.
Yeah, and I even had times, I remember I was off work for a few weeks and I went, when you talk about dreams, there was a period where I would go into a dream, come back, and I would go to sleep again because I was in this very strange, lot of stuff happening, and the dream would pick up exactly where it left off, and this would continue to vacillate, and after about a week, it was very hard to tell, you know, I would call that the dream and this not.
Sure.
So it was getting very confusing.
Sure.
So this is, and it swirls and it's unlimited in what it does, you know, and colors. And
listen, that is the short path. That is Kundalini. If you let yourself attend to that, to whatever degree is comfortable, it will take you very directly and very efficiently to realization.
Well, you know, it's interesting to me, way back then, I suddenly, before I knew anything metaphysical, started painting these enormous spirals. And one of the first times I tried meditation, because I heard you should meditate, blah, 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 I saw this huge spiral actually appeared, and I felt everything in me starting to go into it, and I was terrified because I knew absolutely I would not come back.
Right.
Now, I'd never heard that was anything to be wanting, and I took everything I had to try to pull that out of that energy.
Sure. Yeah.
And I remained out of it ever since, unfortunately. I wish I didn't know.
No, of course.
All the way.
But it's not an all or nothing. It's not like you need to go nuts and need to give up your life and all of that.
I already did that.
Yeah, well, okay, well that's good. That's great. You can cross that off your list. But being with this actual presence of this energy is absolutely profound, and you don't need to give anything up to do it. So just be with it to whatever extent you find comfortable, whenever you feel drawn to. And that will very directly and very efficiently take you all the way to realization. Most direct path.
It seems that if you just allow it more and more, it becomes incredibly alive.
And you discover that everything is that and there's nothing else. You discover that conclusively and self-verifyingly and obviously. And that becomes your perspective. And all of a sudden, and you also discover you are this tingling energy. And so, that's a vastly different perspective than the normal perspective where we're this little person in this body stuck in these circumstances needing to survive and blah, 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 blah.
Well, and it's interesting because I have had, with these 7 radical where it is all I am.
Yeah.
But then after however long, this other part seems to contract.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's very typical. But again, just keep revisiting the energy whenever you feel comfortable, and that's all you need. That's if you have access to that, that's the shortest path there is.
So it's what you said about that interested me. Caught my attention.
I've heard someone said that Krishnamurti said the secret teaching was that I don't care what happens, and I've heard it like not having a preference. You said don't give a shit. But these are actually expressions of the byproduct.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're not the thing you could ever shoot for. It's like
the
byproduct.
You don't get liberation. You get realization, and liberation comes with. It happens that after realization you don't give a shit, but it's not like you're shooting for not to give a shit.
Good. Okay.
There's also kind of a sinking feeling. That feels very quiet and very, I would say loving, for lack of a better, being personal, but
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely wonderful. I mean, when you let yourself really begin to experience this, it becomes completely seductive because it's so luscious and yummy and nourishing and just full, and it's like this yummy, warm hot tub of delight you just melt into. Those aren't technical terms, Bob.
That's a good for sure.
Yeah, I don't know the Sanskrit equivalent. I'm sure there is one.
In this conversation, it's always so profound, and yet we sit here and it's all so casual and calm. Is that because we already know all this, or?
I don't know. I know it. I think you do know. I think you do know it on some level. If you can hear it and resonate with it, then you can relate to it, which means you have something, at least something in you that knows it. Maybe to a very profound degree, maybe less so. Whatever. True. But I mean, this is normalcy. I mean, this stuff is profound and mind blowing, but it's not anything new. It's not talked about because most people don't acknowledge that that's what our situation is. But what we're talking about, as far as it is actually just normalcy the way it's always been. It's nothing new. This has always been that. So it's not, it's just same old, another day, another dollar. It just happens to have always been made of transcendental light.
Well, today, from the very beginning up to now, is my whole body is kind of tingling, is just the energy shooting. And whoever's talking, just energy everywhere.
Good.
But actually, this is not. It's just so profound today up to this point. It's actually happening accumulative, on a daily basis, and more and more.
Wonderful.
So, is this something? This is not something that I wanted to happen. It's just it happens on its own.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Do I need to know anything more? I don't know.
Helen, you don't need anything. You're doing great. Enjoy the ride.
In my experience, I get present.
Oh yeah, right.
I get the impersonal thing with thoughts and emotions. And even like the energy, but most of my energy seems to be in the throat. Like that's
Yeah, sure.
I'm kind of like Helen now. Like, what am I missing here? Like, what is
You're doing great. You're not missing anything. If you get presence, presence is great. Presence is as good as tingling radiance. If you get presence, that's also at the very root of things. Just be with presence whenever you can. You know, just feel it, whatever. Contact it. You know it to whatever degree you do, and don't cling to it. Just be with it, know it, and then if it goes away, you start tripping out on something. Just let it go. Don't worry about it. Just keep coming back to it again and again. Presence is, again, at the very, very root of things. It's completely transcendental. So just being with presence, it take you right there.
Yeah, I mean, it is like that, and it's kind of like
Yeah.
a wave. It's like
Yeah. Yeah, let it be. Yeah, let it be dynamic. Let it breathe. Let it come and go. Don't try to cling to it. Just let it wash through you when it does, and that's all you need. That's great. You know, nothing else you need. Nothing else. That's great. If you have access to really noticing that, to really being with that, that is ultimately profound.
So just let it come and go.
Yeah.
Because
Don't hold it.
in
Don't grasp.
reflection, I thought, oh, it felt so wonderful.
Yeah.
But I'm not feeling that way right this, not now, but I mean, I experienced it, and then
but
I wish I were feeling that way now.
No, just enjoy it when you can. Go to it when you can, when it's easy. And when you start losing it or drifting away from it, just let it go. Be easy and loose with it. Be playful with it. Enjoy it. You know, don't try to cling to it because that just creates more structure and actually pushes it away. Yeah, all that. You know, the point is to loosen up, to lighten up, to sort of let go and go with the flow kind of thing. You know, to sort of be in a more of that kind of a mode with it, and that actually proves to be the most efficient way to be with it. It's sort of paradoxical. When you let go of it, you actually get it more.
Someone says love more and care less. It feels more like
That's
care
good.
less.
Sure, love more and care less. Sure, but love, you have to understand what love means. Love means integration with this presence, with this light.
Yeah.
Inclusion. Love. The word love really means inclusion.
Yeah.
Or transparency. Transparent inclusion. I'm talking too much about that.
Sometimes I just feel so obvious. There's no answer to anything. You can't know anything. Whatever you look into it, you can't find anything. That makes me look at all the self pictures, you know, all those articles and everything, all the papers, everything. It's like laughable.
Yeah. Yeah. true.
You spoke about spirals, and the lady behind me had these incredible experiences with them, which I've never had. But it's occurred to me that whenever I doodle, like with talking this morning, I do spirals. So could you say a little bit more about that?
It's one of the primal forms of energy.
A spiral is.
Sure. There's a lot of primal forms of energy. Basic doodles tend to go into spirals, crosses, X's, dots, circles. There's a lot of sort of primal forms that energy will take. And these are all forms that will show up in visionary experience. You sit and close your eyes and look for a while, and you begin to see these sort of shapes spontaneously appearing inside. Because there's some of the primal modes of the forms that the energy goes into in its more primal condition before it gets into these incredible elaborations we experience in our environment.
What aspect of the original experience that occurred that made you go crazy for a while? What was it about that made you quote unquote go crazy?
Oh, it's complete irrationality. I saw very clearly and obviously that everything was inside me, and I was inside everything, and I was outside everything, and I saw that the absolute multidimensionality of everything. Again, this can't really be verbalized, but just its profound irrationality.
It just didn't mesh with what you'd seen previously.
It didn't mesh with anything. It didn't mesh with itself. It didn't mesh with any of my modes of approaching it. It was unexpected, to say the least, and the fact that it was actual and undeniable. So I couldn't, you can't put the genie back in the bottle kind of thing.
Couldn't dismiss it.
Yeah. So it was, and also the fact, I was a 22-year-old kid back in those days, so I just didn't have the maturity or the stability to really sort of be with that with much poise, let's say.
Yeah. Were you studying with a teacher?
I wasn't, but I was spending time with an astounding being who, in whose company this occurred. But he wasn't a teacher, and I wasn't studying. Technically, he was probably more of a drinking buddy. But hey, you take what you can get, right?
So when you talked about spirals, like I feel these like they're like cones, but they're spirals.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Not what you're talking about.
Sure, that's some of the
They're
forms the
like
energy
twin
takes.
hands.
Yeah, sure.
I took a class in quantum touch, which is a healing thing, and I used to feel, and I mean I do feel many times energy coming through my hands.
Oh yeah, sure.
But this time it feels more conical, I guess you would say. Conical? I don't know.
Conical,
like
sure.
a coin, like a cone.
Yeah, sure. Conical. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's very easy to feel, energy, the hands, energy here, all sorts of sub-vortices. And so, I mean, you can sort of just explore your body and just feel, just sort of feel like around your body and just feel for sort of buzz or just activity of any kind, and you find it's very easy to find. I mean, I find it's easy.
Seems more prominent on the right side of your left side.
Might be, yeah, might be. Different, because, the energy system is dynamic and constantly balancing itself and lighting up and dimming down and so on and so forth.
That doesn't, always be that way.
Not necessarily.
Will be more predominant.
Yeah, not necessarily, whatever. I mean, this is, that's a very good paradigm. We tend to talk more in terms of sort of perceptual stuff here, but this is all about subtle energy, and, you can, approaching this as, in terms of the subtle energy body, and subtle energy embodiment is a very viable and practical and efficient way of approaching it as well. Because sensory experience is actually a subtle energy body phenomenon. Your gross body is actually just a misperception of your subtle body, and so on. It's the same with the senses and so on.
It's a misperception.
A misperception of it, yeah.
So
like a shadow
the body
of
we
it.
think is just a misperception
Yeah.
of our subtle body.
Yeah. And then the subtle body is a misperception of your causal body. The causal body is a misperception of the absolute. But it's all, but it's all right here. It's all right here. So the problem with that mode of approaching it is it can get kind of structural, and it's easy to start thinking of it in structural terms, which is it's not inaccurate, but it can be a real stumbling block. In terms of practicality, it's the dynamism that matters, and the dynamism shoots through all of it. So it's like it strings it together. So that's why being with the dynamism, being with the presence, or being with the radiance is more to the point, because that is like what goes through the whole, all the levels of the system is all that, and that is purely itself on every level. So what radiance is in the absolute is exactly the same thing as radiance is here, so-called physically. So that's why radiance is, or presence is the same thing, from a different perspective, is the absolute shortest and most direct means of noticing, of sort of connecting to the core of things.
Isn't it the trying to understand? That's kind of where we get.
Yeah, we try and understand, we try and make sense of it, we try and model it, and we get all mic'd up because it's fundamentally irrational and nonlinear and infinite and multidimensional. So if you try to make sense of it or understand it in any sense, you're going to miss it because you're going to approach it too heavy-handedly.
Because I used to have a lot of very specific visuals from very specific places, and I didn't matter if eyes were closed or open, they were absolutely there. And then recently there was this very huge, that was only when my eyes closed, but I woke up with it, was this huge gold yellow thing with incredible detail. I mean, it reminded me somewhat of mine, or one of those, you know, weird, that kind of weird.
Uh-huh.
I had no clue, it didn't mean a damn thing to me.
Uh-huh.
But it just showed up and stayed for a while, you
Uh-huh.
know, and I wondered if maybe ancients or somebody, tribal people were able to sense more into it, or there's really no meaning.
No, there is profound meaning, and it's all interconnected, and it all resonates. And when you see the energy, you begin to see it showing up in all of these different resonant nodes. You see them showing up throughout history and cross-culturally in various ways. And all these different sort of things will light up for you. Because it's all connected, it's all the same thing. It's like the different mirrors reflecting the same sun kind of thing. And so the important thing is not to fixate on the form that seems to show up or embody it, but follow it to the light or the energy that it's coming from. And they're all true. They're all true because all forms are ultimately reflections of the same energy. And definitely different cultures, particularly shamanic cultures and that kind of thing, or more magical cultures, tuned in very specifically to these kinds of things and embodied a lot of their forms very, more.
Yeah, it was so detailed, that's what was so bizarre. I couldn't even draw it.
I have to knock off in about 5 minutes to catch a flight home. So if there's any last minute issues, now would be the time.
That song is great.
Oh, good.
That's the one I've ever had.
Oh, good.
No, I'm so fond of this teaching, and I love teaching so much. I've been seeing, even though my spiritual journey is very short, but I've been seeing a few teachers, and you are the best. And you leave nothing for us to grasp.
Oh, good. That's my goal. Strip you naked. Well, except for Santa Claus. Give all your encumbrances to Stan, and he'll take care of it.
Thank you for coming and never miss.
Oh, my pleasure.
Never miss coming though.
I'll do my best. Well, I will see. I will be back here in 4 weeks or so, and I expect I might see a lot of you then, and I'll see some of you in about 2 weeks. And have a lovely month, or 2 weeks, or whatever.
Thank you. Thank you very much.